Welcome to Hero Biography, where legends and extraordinary individuals are brought to life through inspiring stories that help you learn, grow, and level up every day. Subscribe now so you don't miss out. At its peak, the Mongol Empire didn't just win wars, it erased opposition. Cities surrendered at the rumor of its approach. Armies dissolved before contact. From the plains of Central Asia to the edges of Europe, conquest felt less like a campaign and more like a force of nature. And leading that force was Kublai Khan, a ruler with the resources of China, the legacy of Genghis Khan, and a vision that stretched across oceans. By every metric that matters, scale, speed, discipline, the outcome seemed obvious. When Kublai Khan set his sights on Japan, it wasn't framed as a gamble. It was the next logical step. A wealthy island, politically divided, within reach of a newly built fleet. Another chapter in an unbroken record of victories. And yet, this is where the pattern breaks. Because Japan didn't collapse on contact. It didn't submit under pressure. It didn't follow the script that had defined Mongol success everywhere else. Not once, but twice, the invasion stalled, fractured, and ultimately failed. So here's the question that still pulls historians, and should pull you, in. How does the most dominant military machine of its time lose to an island it expected to absorb? Was it strategy, culture, logistics, or something no general can plan for? This is the story of why even the Mongols couldn't conquer Japan in 1274 and 1281, and what that tells us about power, limits, and the moments that rewrite history. Long before fleets set sail for Japan, the story begins on the open grasslands of Central Asia, an environment that produced a different kind of army and a different kind of leader. Genghis Khan didn't inherit a superpower. He built one from scattered tribes by rethinking how war itself should be fought. Loyalty replaced lineage, merit beat aristocracy, and discipline was enforced with a clarity that left no room for hesitation. What emerged wasn't just a stronger force, it was a system. Units were organized in clean, scalable structures, communication moved with remarkable speed, and commanders were expected to adapt in real time. In a world where most armies fought with rigid traditions, this flexibility was revolutionary. The Mongols didn't just move fast, they redefined speed. Mounted archers could travel distances that would exhaust conventional troops, striking where enemies felt safe and disappearing before retaliation could organize. But speed alone wasn't the weapon, fear was. Word of Mongol campaigns traveled ahead of the army, carrying stories of cities that resisted and paid the price. That reputation became a strategic asset. When gates opened without a fight, it wasn't luck, it was design. And when resistance did come, the Mongols met it with coordinated tactics, feigned retreats, encirclements, synchronized volleys that broke formations and morale at the same time. As their reach extended, their approach evolved. They absorbed technologies and expertise from the regions they conquered, engineers from China, administrators from Persia, siege specialists from across Eurasia. This wasn't a static empire imposing one way of war. It was an adaptive machine that learned, integrated, and improved with every campaign. The result was expansion on a scale the world had never seen. By the time their banners appeared on the edges of Europe, the Mongol Empire stretched across continents, connecting trade routes and reshaping the map in a single generation. Then came the transition. Power shifted from the founder's raw, unifying force to a more complex imperial structure under Kublai Khan. Unlike his grandfather, Kublai ruled from a seat of established civilization. After consolidating control over China and founding the Yuan dynasty, he faced a new challenge: how to project Mongol dominance across water. It was a different kind of problem, less about cavalry and open terrain, more about logistics, shipbuilding, and sustained supply lines. But from Kublai's perspective, the logic held. The empire had overcome deserts, mountains, and fortified cities. It had adapted to every obstacle placed in its path. There was no precedent for failure, only delay. So when he looked east toward Japan, he saw not a limit, but an extension. Another frontier to absorb, another proof point that the system still worked. And with the resources of China at his disposal, he had the means to try. In the late 13th century, Japan didn't look like the kind of place that could defy a global superpower. There was no single emperor directing a unified state in the way Kublai Khan governed China. Real authority rested with a military government known as the Kamakura shogunate, a system built not on imperial ceremony but on the loyalty of warriors. Power flowed through personal bonds, land grants, and a network of regional lords who answered, ultimately, to the shogun. It was decentralized, sometimes fragmented, and far from the bureaucratic efficiency of the Yuan dynasty. From the outside, it looked vulnerable. But that surface impression missed something essential. The backbone of this system was the samurai class, fighters shaped by a code that prized honor, discipline, and personal courage above all else. What would later be called Bushido wasn't just a set of rules. It was a mindset. Reputation mattered. Loyalty mattered. The willingness to face death without hesitation wasn't a dramatic flourish. It was expected. In a culture like that, war wasn't just about victory. It was about how you fought and who you were when you did. That's where the collision began. Mongol warfare was collective, coordinated, and ruthlessly pragmatic. Units moved as one, attacks were synchronized, and individual heroics meant little against massed volleys of arrows and explosives. Samurai warfare, by contrast, still carried elements of ritual. Warriors announced themselves, sought worthy opponents, and valued individual combat as a measure of status. When these two systems met, it wasn't just an army versus an army, it was one philosophy of war colliding with another. And yet, when Kublai Khan's envoys arrived demanding submission, Japan's response was unambiguous: no. There was no negotiation that ended in tribute, no quiet acceptance of Mongol authority. The refusal was as much cultural as it was political. To submit without a fight would have meant abandoning the very identity that held their society together. Even knowing what the Mongols had done across Asia, the leadership in Kamakura chose resistance. It's easy, looking back, to assume this was reckless. The Mongols had crushed far larger and more organized states. But Japan wasn't making a calculation based purely on odds. It was acting on a different set of values, ones that didn't translate neatly into the Mongol playbook. And that difference, subtle at first, would become decisive once the invasion began. In the fall of 1274, the horizon off Japan darkened with sails. It wasn't a raid or a probing force, it was a statement. The fleet assembled under Kublai Khan carried thousands of troops drawn from across the Mongol Empire, Mongols, Koreans, and Chinese soldiers moving together as a single machine. For Japan, this was the first real glimpse of what it meant to face a power that had already crushed continents. The first targets were the outlying islands of Tsushima and Iki, natural stepping stones on the way to Kyushu. What followed there was swift and brutal. Local defenders fought with the courage expected of samurai, but courage alone couldn't close the gap in scale and coordination. The Mongol forces moved with discipline, landing in organized waves and overwhelming resistance before it could consolidate. Commanders were cut down, villages burned, and the islands fell in rapid succession. It wasn't just defeat, it was a preview of what might happen on the mainland. When the invasion reached Kyushu, the differences in warfare became impossible to ignore. Samurai rode out expecting to engage individual opponents, to test skill and honor in direct combat. Instead, they met something entirely unfamiliar. Mongol troops advanced in tight formations, releasing volleys of arrows that darkened the sky. They used explosive projectiles, primitive but effective, designed to disorient and break lines. Signals coordinated movement across units, allowing them to strike, regroup, and strike again with precision. This wasn't chaos, it was choreography. For the samurai, the psychological impact was as significant as the physical one. Their training had prepared them for bravery, for discipline, for facing death head-on, but not for an enemy that refused to play by the same rules. Individual duels meant little when faced with coordinated fire. Charging into a formation didn't result in honor. It resulted in isolation and vulnerability. The battlefield felt unfamiliar, almost inverted, as if the assumptions that had always guided them no longer applied. And yet, they didn't break. They adapted in real time, holding positions where they could, regrouping when lines collapsed, buying time at a cost. But the momentum was clearly with the invaders. The Mongols had done exactly what they had done everywhere else: arrived with speed, imposed their system, and taken control. At that moment, it looked like the pattern would hold. Another campaign, another victory. Japan seemed on the brink of becoming just another entry in the Mongol record of conquest. But what happened next had nothing to do with tactics, training, or leadership, and everything to do with forces no army could command. The turning point didn't come from a brilliant counterattack or a last-stand victory. It came from the sky. As the Mongol forces held their position off the coast of Japan, preparing to press their advantage, the weather began to shift. What started as rough seas quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. A sudden, violent storm that neither side had planned for and no commander could control. At first, it was confusion. Winds picked up, waves grew unpredictable, and communication between ships broke down. Then came the full force of it. The storm tore through the anchored fleet with relentless intensity. Ships, many of them hastily constructed or unfamiliar with open ocean conditions, were slammed against each other or driven into the rocky coastline. Anchors snapped. Hulls cracked. What had been a disciplined invasion force turned into chaos in a matter of hours. For the Mongol troops, the battlefield disappeared beneath them. There were no formations to hold, no tactics to execute, only survival. Soldiers were thrown into the sea, weighed down by armor, struggling against waves that didn't care about rank or training. Entire vessels vanished in the darkness, taking their crews with them. Fires broke out on damaged ships, adding to the panic. The same coordination that had defined Mongol success on land meant little in a storm that scattered everything it touched. By the time the weather cleared, the scale of the destruction was undeniable. A significant portion of the fleet was gone, sunk, shattered, or rendered unusable. Survivors were exhausted, disoriented, and cut off from any coherent plan. The invasion, which had seemed inevitable just days earlier, had lost its momentum in the most unpredictable way possible. Faced with mounting losses and no clear path forward, the Mongol command made a decision they rarely had to make: withdraw. The remaining ships regrouped as best they could and began the journey back, carrying with them not victory, but the memory of a campaign undone by forces beyond strategy. For Japan, the outcome felt almost unreal. What had looked like the beginning of conquest had turned into a narrow escape. There had been no decisive battlefield triumph, no clear moment of dominance, just survival. And yet, survival was enough. The invasion had failed. But beneath that relief was a deeper realization. If the Mongols had come this far once, they could come again. And next time, they might not be stopped by a storm. The aftermath of 1274 didn't feel like a victory on either side. For Kublai Khan, the failed invasion was an interruption, not an ending. Empires like his didn't accept limits. They adjusted and returned. Backed by the administrative and economic weight of the Yuan dynasty, he committed to a second attempt with a clarity of purpose that left little room for doubt. Shipyards expanded along the coasts of China and Korea. Timber, iron, and labor were redirected at scale. The next expedition wouldn't be a test, it would be overwhelming. But scale introduced its own complications. Building a navy from scratch meant relying on conscripted craftsmen, unfamiliar designs, and tight timelines. Coordination across regions added friction. Even so, the numbers kept rising: more ships, more troops, more supplies, because the underlying assumption remained unchanged. If the system had worked everywhere else, it would work here with enough force. Across the sea, Japan read the first invasion differently. Survival wasn't interpreted as proof of superiority, it was a warning. The Kamakura leadership moved quickly to close the gaps that had nearly cost them everything. Along vulnerable coastlines in Kyushu, defensive walls were constructed to complicate landings and buy time. Local forces trained with a new focus on coordination rather than individual duels. Watch systems improved. Signals were standardized. The mindset shifted from reactive bravery to prepared resistance. More importantly, both sides absorbed lessons that would shape the next encounter. The Mongols recognized the challenges of projecting power across open water and the need for tighter integration between fleets. Japan recognized that the enemy they faced didn't fight by familiar rules, and that adapting wasn't optional. By 1281, neither side was walking into the same war they had fought 7 years earlier. One was determined to correct a rare failure. The other was determined to make sure that failure wasn't a fluke. By 1281, the return of the Mongols wasn't a possibility, it was a certainty. What arrived off the shores of Japan wasn't just another expedition, but the largest invasion force the Mongol Empire had ever assembled for a single campaign. Tens of thousands of troops, drawn from across East Asia, filled a massive armada of ships. This was scale turned into strategy, the kind of overwhelming presence meant to erase doubt before the first battle even began. The plan itself reflected that ambition. Instead of a single approach, the Mongols organized a dual fleet strategy. One force sailed from Korea, another from southern China, with the intention of converging on Japan from different directions. The goal was simple: stretch defenses, divide attention, and strike with coordinated pressure that no single line of resistance could withstand. If timing held, Japan would be forced into a defensive posture it couldn't sustain. At first, the momentum seemed to favor the invaders. The sheer size of the force created immediate pressure along the coast. Landing attempts probed for weaknesses, and Mongol coordination, refined through years of campaigning, began to show. Compared to 1274, this felt more deliberate, more prepared. The earlier failure had clearly been studied. But Japan was not the same target it had been 7 years before. Defenses along Kyushu disrupted clean landings, forcing Mongol troops to fight for every foothold instead of sweeping ashore. Local forces responded faster, operating with a level of coordination that had been missing in the first invasion. Small units moved with purpose, reinforcing weak points and preventing breakthroughs from expanding. What emerged wasn't a decisive opening victory, but a tense, grinding contest. The Mongols still held the advantage in numbers and organization, but the easy momentum they expected never fully materialized. And as days turned into weeks, the question began to shift, not whether Japan would fall quickly, but whether the invasion could maintain its pressure long enough to succeed. What changed the trajectory of the campaign wasn't a single decisive clash, but a series of quiet adjustments that added up over time. Along the northern coast of Kyushu in Japan, newly built stone walls did exactly what they were designed to do. They denied the invaders a clean entry. Instead of pouring ashore in organized waves, Mongol troops were forced into fragmented landings under pressure, buying precious hours, sometimes days, for local forces to concentrate and respond. It wasn't glamorous, but it was effective. Just as important was what happened after sunset. Japanese fighters began launching small, targeted raids against Mongol ships anchored offshore. Under cover of darkness, they moved in fast boats, boarding vessels, setting fires, and creating confusion that rippled through the fleet. These weren't large-scale assaults meant to win the war in a single blow. They were calculated disruptions designed to chip away at momentum. Every damaged ship meant fewer supplies, fewer stable platforms for staging attacks, and more uncertainty for commanders trying to maintain order across a sprawling armada. On land, the approach shifted as well. Instead of seeking decisive engagements on open ground, Japanese forces leaned into mobility and local knowledge. They harassed supply routes, struck isolated units, and withdrew before larger formations could respond. It looked less like traditional battlefield honor and more like controlled pressure, forcing the Mongols to react rather than dictate the pace. The result was something the Mongols rarely encountered, a campaign that refused to resolve. Weeks passed without a breakthrough. The invaders still held numerical and organizational advantages, but those advantages weren't translating into decisive gains. Every attempt to establish a foothold met resistance that adapted and tightened. The campaign settled into a stalemate, an uncomfortable position for an empire built on momentum, where time itself began to work against them. By late summer of 1281, the campaign had stalled in a way the Mongols weren't built for. The armada lingered off the coast of Japan, stretched across anchorages, supply lines thinning, pressure mounting with every passing day. And then the weather began to turn, subtle at first, a shift in wind and swell that seasoned sailors recognize as a warning. What followed was anything but subtle. The typhoon hit with a force that erased distinctions between preparation and vulnerability. Winds howled through the fleet, driving waves high enough to lift ships and slam them back down with crushing impact. Anchors tore loose. Lines snapped. Vessels collided in the dark, splintering hulls and tangling rigging into deadly traps. Fires broke out where they could, only to be swallowed by rain and spray. Coordination, the Mongols' greatest advantage on land, became impossible. Orders couldn't carry over the roar, and formations meant nothing against water that moved like a wall. This wasn't damage, it was annihilation. Ships built in haste and from mixed traditions couldn't withstand the sustained violence of open sea conditions. Some were driven onto the rocks along the Kyushu coast and shattered on impact. Others capsized in deep water, taking entire crews with them. Men who had marched across continents found themselves fighting a different enemy entirely, one that didn't negotiate, didn't retreat, and didn't care how disciplined you were. Armor dragged soldiers under. Debris turned the sea into a maze of hazards. Survival came down to chance as much as strength. As the storm raged, the invasion ceased to exist as a coherent operation. What remained was scattered, broken, and leaderless in practical terms. When the winds finally eased, the scale of the loss became clear. A massive portion of the fleet was gone, sunk, destroyed, or rendered unusable. Survivors clung to wreckage or struggled ashore, disoriented and exhausted, with no path to regroup at the scale required to continue. There was no final battle, no dramatic last stand to mark the end. The decision made itself. The remnants withdrew. The second invasion, planned as a decisive conquest, collapsed under the weight of forces no empire could command. And in that moment, the outcome shifted from uncertain to irreversible. The Mongols would not conquer Japan. By the end of 1281, the outcome was clear, but the reasons behind it are more layered than a single dramatic storm. Start with geography. Japan isn't a land you can march into. It's a chain of islands that forces any invader to solve a complex maritime problem first. Every mile of water becomes a filter for timing, coordination, and supply. Even a small delay at sea compounds into missed rendezvous, exposed anchorages, and fractured command once forces approached the coast. Isolation, in this case, wasn't just distance, it was a defensive system. That exposed a second weakness. The Mongols were not a naval power by tradition. Their dominance had been built on mobility across open land, not on sustained operations at sea. Under Kublai Khan, fleets were assembled quickly using Korean and Chinese shipyards, but speed came at a cost. Designs were mixed, crews were drawn from different traditions, and cohesion, so reliable on land, was harder to maintain on water. When conditions deteriorated, those gaps widened fast. Japan, meanwhile, changed. After 1274, the response wasn't to double down on tradition but to adapt. Coastal defenses slowed landings, forcing attackers into fragmented entries instead of clean waves. Night raids disrupted ships at anchor, turning the fleet itself into a liability. Tactically, the shift away from individual duels toward coordinated resistance made a measurable difference. It didn't eliminate Mongol advantages, but it blunted them enough to buy time that proved decisive. Logistics amplified every one of these issues. Moving and sustaining a force of that size across the sea required precise timing, reliable supply lines, and stable staging areas. Any disruption, weather, damage, delays, rippled through the entire system. Food, water, and coordination aren't abstract concepts. They're the difference between pressure and paralysis. As the campaign stretched, the margin for error disappeared. And then there's nature, not as a myth, but as a variable. The so-called kamikaze storms didn't create weakness, they exposed it at scale. Poor anchorage choices, uneven ship quality, and extended timelines turned bad weather into catastrophe. In a different context, the Mongol system absorbed shocks and adapted. At sea, under those conditions, it couldn't. Put together, the failure wasn't a fluke. It was the intersection of environment, adaptation, and limits, proof that even the most effective system breaks when it's pushed outside the domain it was built to dominate. When the fleets withdrew and the storms passed, the consequences reached far beyond a single failed campaign. For the Mongol Empire, the collapse of the invasions of Japan marked a quiet but meaningful boundary. Expansion didn't stop everywhere at once, but eastward momentum effectively did. The idea that every frontier could be absorbed with enough pressure no longer held. Even under Kublai Khan, there were limits, geographic, logistical, and strategic, that no amount of ambition could erase. Inside Japan, the impact moved in a different direction. Survival became identity. The experience of facing a global superpower and holding the line, through preparation, adaptation, and endurance, reinforced a shared sense of purpose across regions that had often been divided. The samurai class didn't just defend territory, it solidified its role at the center of political and cultural life. Over time, the memory of resistance would be retold not just as a sequence of events, but as a defining moment, proof that the islands could stand on their own terms. Equally important was what happened to the Mongols' reputation. For decades, they had operated with an aura of inevitability. Victories came so consistently that resistance seemed temporary at best. Japan broke that pattern. 2 failed invasions didn't erase Mongol power, but they fractured the perception of invincibility. Rivals could now point to a real example where the system didn't deliver. And then there's the legacy that outlived the battles themselves, the idea of the divine wind. The storms became more than weather, they became meaning. Interpreted as protection, they were woven into Japan's historical narrative as a reminder that survival sometimes depends on forces beyond human control. Whether viewed as strategy meeting circumstance or as something more symbolic, that legacy endured, shaping how the story is remembered long after the ships were gone. So what truly stopped the Mongol Empire? It wasn't one decisive battle or a single brilliant general. It was a convergence, geography that complicated every move, a society that adapted faster than expected, a system stretched beyond its natural strengths, and moments of pure unpredictability that no strategy could control. Under Kublai Khan, the empire pushed to its limits, and in Japan, those limits finally pushed back. What makes this story endure isn't just the outcome, but the pattern it reveals. Power scales, systems optimize, and success compounds, until they meet conditions they weren't designed for. Then the rules change. The Mongols didn't suddenly become weak. They encountered a context where their strengths didn't translate cleanly. Japan didn't win because it was stronger on paper. It survived because it learned, adapted, and held long enough for circumstances to shift. That's the takeaway that carries beyond history. Whether you're building a business, creating content, or navigating uncertainty, momentum can feel unstoppable, right up to the point where it isn't. The edge often belongs to those who can read the environment, adjust quickly, and keep going when outcomes aren't guaranteed. Power has limits. Adaptation doesn't. If this story changed how you think about strategy, resilience, and the hidden variables that shape outcomes, stick around. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into the moments that rewrote history. And if you're curious where the next unstoppable force met its limits, there's another story waiting, one that might challenge what you think you know just as much as this one did.